My father always said I had the posture of a laborer. He meant it as an insult, usually delivered while sipping a scotch that cost more than a Honda Civic. He would look at my shoulders, slightly hunched from carrying crates, and sneer. I took it as a resume. It was 4 a.m. The sky over Napa Valley was that deep, bruised purple that exists right before the sun decides to burn the mist off the vines. The Hawthorne estate was silent. It was a silence that cost money. Thick walls, triple-paned glass, the kind of quiet that kept the world out. But I wasn't asleep. I was never asleep at 4 a.m. I moved through the commercial kitchen, my steel-toed boots making a dull thud against the imported Italian tile. I tried to walk softly, a habit I had picked up over 27 years of trying to be invisible, but work boots are heavy. I checked the digital monitors on the fermentation tanks. Tank number 4 was running 2 degrees hot. If I didn't adjust the glycol flow right now, $50,000 worth of Cabernet would turn into vinegar before breakfast. I tapped the screen, adjusting the flow rate, watching the numbers settle back into the green zone. "You're welcome, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded rusty. I hadn't spoken to anyone since yesterday afternoon when the delivery driver asked me where to dump the load of fertilizer. He thought I was the groundskeeper. I didn't correct him. I walked out to the loading dock. The air was crisp, smelling of wet earth and crushed grapes. This was the day. The banners were already up along the main driveway, snapping in the wind. Huge, gold-lettered monstrosities that read, "The future of Hawthorne, welcome CEO Bianca Hawthorne. My sister. The golden child. The girl who thought Pinot Noir was a perfume brand until she was 22. Today was her coronation. My father, Preston Hawthorne, was officially handing over the deed to the estate and the CEO title to her in front of 200 of the wealthiest people in California. I looked down at my hands. They were rough, the skin around my fingernails permanently stained purple from grape juice and black from engine grease. I wasn't just the winemaker. I was the accountant. I was the janitor. I was the IT department. I was the architect who designed the new tasting room that Bianca was going to take credit for in about 12 hours. For 5 years, I had run this place from the shadows. And for 5 years, my parents had treated me like an embarrassing stain on their pristine reputation. They called me slow. They called me simple. They told their friends I was finding myself while I was actually finding errors in their tax returns that would have sent them to federal prison. I pulled a small, battered notebook from my back pocket. I wrote down the tank temperature, the time, and the adjustment I made. Then I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the page. Click. It was a reflex now. Document everything. Every hour. Every task. Every insult. The kitchen door swung open behind me. I didn't flinch. I knew that heavy, rhythmic tread. It wasn't my father. It was Marcus, the vineyard manager. The only other person on this property who actually knew how to make wine. "Morning, Val," Marcus said, his voice gravelly from sleep and cigarettes. He handed me a paper cup of coffee. "Saw the light on in the tank room. Number 4 acting up again?" "Yeah," I said, taking the coffee. The warmth seeped into my cold fingers. "The sensor is drifting. I need to recalibrate it, but I can't shut the system down until after harvest." Marcus shook his head, looking out at the rows of vines stretching toward the hills. "You know your dad is going to claim the yield increase is due to his superior management style in his speech today, right?" "Let him," I said, taking a sip. "He can claim he invented the sun for all I care. Is the security team ready?" Marcus paused. He looked at me, really looked at me. He was a good man, 50 years old, with a face like tanned leather. He was the only one who suspected I was up to something, but he never asked. He just helped. "The extra staff I hired for the parking lot?" Marcus asked. "Yeah. They're here. But Val, these guys aren't valet drivers. They look like they eat valet drivers. Good, I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. We might need them to take out the trash later. You playing with fire, kid, Marcus warned, though there was a glint of admiration in his eyes. No, Marcus, I said, finishing the coffee and crushing the cup in my hand. I'm not playing with fire. I'm the one who designed the sprinkler system. I'm just about to turn the water off. I turned back to the house. The lights in the master bedroom had just flicked on. The king and queen were awake. It was time for the ghost to go back to the scullery. At 10 o'clock, the limousine rolled up the driveway. It was white, stretched, and obnoxious, the perfect chariot for my sister. I was on my knees in the foyer, polishing a scuff mark on the marble floor that my mother, Cordelia, had pointed out 3 times that morning. She stood over me now, holding a clipboard, looking like a statue carved out of ice and Chanel fabric. Rub harder, Valerie, she said, not looking at me, but at the dust motes dancing in the light. Bianca is bringing her fiancé's parents. I won't have this house looking like a kennel. Yes, mother, I said. My voice was flat. I had learned a long time ago that any emotion I showed was just fuel for them. If I cried, I was unstable. If I argued, I was rebellious. If I stayed silent, I was slow. Slow was the safest option. The heavy oak doors swung open. Security guards rushed to grab the luggage. And then, there she was. Bianca. She looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine photo shoot, which she probably had. Her hair was a cascading waterfall of blonde highlights that cost more than my entire wardrobe. She wore a white sundress that was aggressively simple, the kind of casual that screams wealth. Home, she shrieked, throwing her arms out. Oh my God, the air here is just so rustic. Cordelia rushed forward, bypassing me completely, stepping over my legs as if I were a piece of furniture. Darling. You look exhausted. Paris was too much. It was brutal, Mom, Bianca sighed, hugging her. The Fashion Week parties went until 3 in the morning every night. I am literally running on caffeine and willpower. She spotted me on the floor. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes changed. They went from warm to cold in a nanosecond. It was a look I knew well. It was the look you give a stray dog that you're afraid might have fleas. Oh, hey Val, she said. Still, down there? Hi, Bianca, I said, dipping the rag into the bucket. Welcome back. Thanks, she said, wrinkling her nose slightly. God, what is that smell? It smells like chemicals and sweat. I was checking the fermentation tanks, I said. Well, could you go shower? Bianca laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound. I have the vibe curator coming in 20 minutes to check the feng shui for the party. I don't want you scaring him off with your whole situation. She gestured vaguely at my coveralls. Valerie, my mother snapped, her voice sharp. You heard your sister. Go to the servants' quarters and clean yourself up. And use the back stairs. We don't want you tracking grease on the carpet. Actually, Aunt Lydia piped up from the doorway. I hadn't seen her come in. Lydia was my mother's younger sister, a woman who had made a career out of being a professional sycophant. Maybe she should stay out of sight entirely, Cordelia. Remember last Christmas? She tried to talk to the senator about tax law and embarrassed us all. I tightened my grip on the rag until my knuckles turned white. I hadn't embarrassed anyone. The senator had asked a question about agricultural deductions, and I had answered it correctly. My father had interrupted, laughed, and told the senator, ignore her, she just repeats things she hears on the radio. She doesn't actually understand the concepts. Good point, Lydia, Cordelia said. She turned to me. Valerie, after you shower, go to the catering tent. Stay there. Make sure the ice doesn't melt. That seems like a task you can handle without causing a scene. Ice, I repeated. Got it. And Valerie? Bianca called out as I started to walk away. I stopped. Yes? Don't eat the canapes, she said, winking at our mother. They're $30 apiece. We don't want to waste them on the staff. They all laughed. It was a harmonious, practiced laughter. The sound of a family that was perfectly in sync in their cruelty. I walked to the heavy service door that led to the back hallway. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a soft, definitive click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second. Laugh now, I thought. Laugh while you still own the floor you're standing on. I checked my watch. 10 hours until the party. 10 hours until the speech. 10 hours until I burned their entire world to the ground using nothing but the paperwork they made me sign. To understand why I didn't just leave, why I stayed for 5 years of this torture, you have to understand the level of gaslighting I lived under. You have to understand days like the Great Frost of 2 years ago. It was November. My father and mother were in Aspen for a wellness retreat, which mostly involved drinking hot toddies and networking. Bianca was in New York, pretending to study art history. I was alone at the estate with Marcus and a skeleton crew. The weather forecast had been clear all week. But at 2 in the morning, the temperature plummeted. It was a freak atmospheric event. The valley dropped to 26 degrees Fahrenheit in under an hour. For a vineyard, 26 degrees isn't just cold. It's a death sentence. The sap in the vines freezes, expands, and shatters the cellular structure of the plant. If that happened, we wouldn't just lose the harvest, we would lose the vines. Decades of growth, millions of dollars in future revenue, gone in one night. The alarm in my bedroom went off. It was connected to the field sensors. I didn't call my father. He wouldn't answer, and even if he did, he couldn't do anything from Aspen. I ran. I ran to the equipment shed, screaming for Marcus on the radio. Frost alarm. Sector 3, 4, and 5. Wake the crew. Get the smudge pots. For the next 8 hours, we fought a war against nature. I drove the tractor, towing the heavy trailer of smudge pots, oil-burning heaters that looked like little chimneys. We had to place one every 20 feet along the rows. It was backbreaking work. The metal was freezing, sticking to my gloves. The smoke from the oil burned my eyes and throat. I didn't stop. I couldn't feel my toes. My face was numb. But I kept moving, lighting fires, driving the wind machines to circulate the warm air. At one point, a fuel line on one of the wind machines burst. Diesel sprayed over my jacket. I grabbed a wrench, climbed 30 feet up the tower in the pitch black, slipping on the icy ladder, and fixed it while the wind whipped against me like a physical blow. By sunrise, the temperature began to climb. We had saved 90% of the crop. I was sitting on the ground next to a dying smudge pot, covered in soot, oil, and mud. I was shaking uncontrollably, bordering on hypothermia. Marcus walked over and draped a heavy blanket around me. He didn't say anything, just squeezed my shoulder. It was the only acknowledgement I needed. Then the Range Rover pulled up. My parents had come home early. Not because of the frost, they didn't even know about it yet, but because the Aspen Lodge had a power outage and the spa closed. My father stepped out of the car, looking fresh and rested in his cashmere sweater. He looked at the smoke hanging over the valley. He looked at the exhausted crew. He looked at me, shivering on the ground like a refugee. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Why is there smoke everywhere?" "We had a frost event, sir," Marcus said, stepping forward, his voice raspy. "Dropped to 26 degrees. We." Valerie organized the response. "We saved the crop." My father looked at me. For a second, I thought I saw something like respect. I thought, this is it. This is the moment he sees me. "Valerie organized it?" Preston laughed. A short, dismissive bark. "Marcus, don't cover for her. Look at her. She looks like a chimney sweep." "Sir, she climbed the wind tower to fix the..." "Stop," Preston held up a hand. I know you like to make her feel useful, Marcus. But let's be real. Valerie probably panicked and started lighting fires she couldn't control. I'm surprised she didn't burn the house down. He walked over to me. He didn't offer a hand to help me up. He just looked down. Go clean yourself up, he said, wrinkling his nose. You're embarrassing the staff. And Valerie? Yes? I chattered, my teeth clicking together. Next time, call a professional. Don't try to play hero. You don't have the cognitive capacity for crisis management. He turned back to Marcus. Excellent work, Marcus. I'll be adding a bonus to your check this week. It's good to know there's at least one competent man on this property. I watched him walk away. I sat there in the mud, the smell of diesel choking me, and I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't my heart. It was something harder. It was the hope that they would ever love me. That was the day I stopped trying to earn their love. That was the day I started documenting their debt. That brings us to the Friday ritual. This was the mechanism of my torture, and ultimately, the instrument of their destruction. 2 days before Bianca's party, last Friday, my father called me into his study. Valerie. Office. Now. The study was a shrine to Preston Hawthorne's ego. The walls were lined with awards he had bought, magazine covers he had paid to be on, and photos of him shaking hands with politicians who probably didn't remember his name. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't invite me to sit, but I sat anyway in the stiff wooden chair opposite him. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. A timesheet. Review it, he commanded. I picked up the pen. This was a game we had played every Friday for 5 years. 85 hours this week, Preston said, swirling his drink. Doing what, exactly? Fixing a tractor? Filing invoices? Menial tasks, Valerie. Tasks a monkey could do if trained properly. I renegotiated the distribution contract with the logistics firm, I said quietly. I saved us 12% on shipping costs. Preston slammed his hand on the desk. You meddled. I told you to file the papers, not read them. You're lucky they didn't cancel the contract out of annoyance. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into mine. You know why I make you sign these, right? To track my productivity, I recited the script he wanted to hear. No, he sneered. To teach you that your time has no value until you create value. Right now, you are a cost center. You eat my food. You use my electricity. You occupy my space. This. He tapped the paper. This is you working off your debt to me. $0 per hour is exactly what you are worth. He pushed the paper closer. Sign it. Acknowledge that you are receiving room and board in exchange for your hobby work. I looked at the document. Employee, Valerie Hawthorne role, family intern / general labor hours worked, 85.0 compensation, $0, in kind, room and board, employer signature, Preston Hawthorne. I picked up the pen. My hand used to shake when I did this. I used to cry. I used to beg him to just give me a salary, even minimum wage, so I could feel like a human being. But today, my hand was steady as a surgeon's. I signed my name. What my father didn't know, what his narcissism wouldn't let him see, was that this paper wasn't just a timesheet. It was a legally binding confession. By signing it, he was certifying that I was working full-time. He was certifying that I was uncompensated. And he was doing it week, after week, after week. I handed the paper back. Good, he said, slipping it into a folder. Now get out. I have a meeting with the estate planning attorneys. We need to make sure Bianca's transition to CEO is seamless. Is the operating agreement changing? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Preston laughed. Why would you care? You wouldn't understand the legalese even if I read it to you. No, the foundational documents stay the same. We're just updating the beneficiary structure. Okay, I said. Thanks, Dad. I walked out of the office. As soon as the door clicked shut, I pulled out my phone. I opened the hidden app that looked like a calculator but was actually a secure cloud vault. I had recorded the entire conversation. I added it to the folder labeled Evidence. Then I opened the folder labeled Timesheets. There were 260 files in there. 5 years. 260 weeks. Over 20,000 hours of unpaid labor. I scrolled to the bottom document in the vault. A PDF scan of a yellowing document titled, Hawthorne Estate Operating Agreement, 1995. My eyes traced the lines of Clause 4, Section B. In the event that any direct descendant of the founder contributes substantial labor, defined as exceeding 40 hours per week, for a continuous period of 36 months without financial compensation, said labor shall be classified as sweat equity. Upon the completion of the 36th month, this equity shall automatically convert into Class A preferred voting stock, valued at the current market rate of the labor provided, multiplied by a factor of 3. I did the math in my head again. 20,000 hours. Market rate for a winemaker/CFO/operations manager, roughly $150 an hour. That was $3 million in base labor. Multiplied by 3? 9 million. But there was a second clause. Clause 4, Section C. If the value of the accrued sweat equity exceeds 10% of the estate's total liquid valuation, the holder of said equity is immediately granted the option to trigger a majority hostile takeover to protect their investment from mismanagement. The estate was worth $200 million on paper. But it was leveraged to the hilt with debt that my father was hiding. The liquid valuation? Maybe 50 million. 9 million was nearly 20%. I wasn't just an employee. I was the majority shareholder. And on Saturday night, in front of everyone he tried to impress, I was going to cash in my chips. To understand how I found that clause, we have to go back to the only person in this family who actually loved me. Grandma Josephine. She died 5 years ago. That was the start of my hell, but also the start of my salvation. The funeral was a grand affair, of course. My father spent $50,000 on flowers alone, mostly to show off to his business rivals. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in viticulture that my parents refused to acknowledge. I was standing by the coffin, trying not to cry because my makeup wasn't waterproof and Cordelia had warned me not to look like a raccoon. My father was holding court near the bar, telling a story about how close he and his mother were. It was a lie. Grandma Josephine hated him. She called him a peacock, all feathers and no flight. She had spent her last days in the hospice wing of the hospital. I was the only one who visited her every day. Bianca was too busy modeling in Milan. My parents were too busy spending her money before she was even dead. On her last day, she grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman who weighed 90 pounds. Valerie, she wheezed. My little bird. I'm here, Grandma, I said, smoothing her hair. Listen to me, she whispered. Your father, he is a fool. He will try to crush you. He needs someone to look down on to make himself feel tall. I know, I said. Don't let him, she hissed. I have left breadcrumbs. In the papers. The old papers. The ones he thinks are boring. Read the footnotes, Valerie. Promise me. I promise, I said, though I didn't know what she meant at the time. He thinks he inherits the kingdom, she smiled, a mischievous, sharp smile that I loved. But the kingdom chooses its own queen. Work hard. Keep your head down. And when the time is right, strike. She died an hour later. At the funeral, I was tasked with serving coffee to the guests. My father said it was inappropriate for me to stand in the receiving line because I didn't have the family presence. So I poured coffee. I took coats. I heard people whispering about poor Preston losing his mother. Then the lawyers came to the house for the reading of the will. I wasn't invited into the room. I had to listen through the door. To my son, Preston, the lawyer read, I leave the stewardship of the Hawthorne estate, contingent upon his adherence to the operating agreement of 1995. Standard boilerplate, I heard my father dismiss it. What about the cash? What about the jewelry? He didn't care about the operating agreement. He thought it was just dusty rules about crop rotation and property lines. He never read it. But 6 months later, when he sentenced me to clean out the basement archives as punishment for being too loud at dinner, I found it. The original 1995 agreement. Signed by Josephine Hawthorne in blue ink. I sat on the dusty concrete floor, under the light of a single bare bulb, and I read every single word. Page 1. Page 10. Page 50. And there it was. Page 52. Clause 4. The trap. My grandmother knew Preston would exploit me. She knew he wouldn't pay me. She knew he would try to turn me into a servant. So she weaponized his own greed against him. She turned unpaid labor into the most expensive debt he would ever accrue. I touched her signature on the paper. I felt a jolt of electricity go up my spine. Thank you, Grandma, I whispered into the darkness of the basement. From that day on, I didn't complain about the work. I didn't fight back when they mocked me. I became a machine. Every hour I worked was another brick in the wall of their tomb. Every insult was just interest on the loan. And now, 5 years later, the loan was due. Finding the document was one thing. Understanding how to use it was another. For the first few weeks after I found Grandma Josephine's operating agreement in the basement, I was terrified. I walked around the estate feeling like I was carrying a grenade with the pin pulled out. Every time my father looked at me, I thought he knew. Every time my mother critiqued my outfit, I wanted to scream, I own your shoes. I own the floor you're standing on. But I didn't. I remembered Grandma's advice, keep your head down. I realized that the sweat equity clause had a trap built into it. It required 36 consecutive months of full-time, unpaid labor. If I missed a week, if I got sick, if I went on vacation, or if my father decided to fire me for a month just to be cruel, the clock would reset. I couldn't just do the work. I had to be indispensable. I had to make sure they needed me here every single day. So, I became the ghost in the machine. I took over the accounting when the previous CFO quit because my father refused to pay his bonus. I learned the software in 3 nights, fueled by espresso and spite. I organized the supply chain. I negotiated with the glass bottle suppliers in China at 3 a.m. And every Friday, I sat in that chair, took the abuse, and signed the timesheet. My neuroticism about record-keeping went from a habit to a religion. I bought a second phone, a cheap burner that I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out book on viticulture in my room. Every document I signed, I scanned. Every email my father sent me demanding work, fix the server, the Wi-Fi is down, go pick up Bianca's dress, audit the tax returns, I forwarded to an encrypted server. I even started wearing a smartwatch that tracked my GPS location and heart rate, syncing it with the timestamps on the security cameras. If they ever tried to claim I wasn't working, I could prove exactly where I was standing and how fast my heart was beating while I was doing it. One evening, about a year after finding the document, I was in the library fixing the estate's Wi-Fi router. My father was hosting a poker game with his business associates, a group of men who wore loafers without socks and laughed too loud. "Preston, your overhead must be killing you," one of them said, lighting a cigar. "Maintaining a property this size? The staff costs alone." "I keep it lean," Preston bragged, pouring a 50-year-old scotch. "Very lean. We believe in family contributions." He glanced at me. I was on my knees under the desk, rewiring the router. "Valerie here loves the work," he said, kicking my boot lightly with his foot. "Don't you, Val? It gives her purpose. Some people aren't built for leadership. They find comfort in service." The men laughed. Cheaper than a maid, one of them joked. Much cheaper, Preston grinned. And the loyalty is built in. Where else is she going to go? I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. Where am I going to go? I thought. I'm going straight to the bank, Dad. I finished the wiring. The internet light turned green. Wi-Fi is up, I said, crawling out from under the desk. Good, Preston dismissed me with a wave of his hand. Refresh the ice bucket on your way out. I walked to the kitchen. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors. I simply pulled out my phone, opened the evidence folder, and logged the interaction. Date, August 14, 2022. Witnesses, 4, subject, public admission of unpaid labor in lieu of professional staffing. They thought they were breaking me. They didn't realize they were just helping me build the most airtight legal case in the history of California corporate law. You can't steal an empire alone. You need a lawyer who hates your enemy as much as you do. Mr. Holloway had been my grandmother's attorney for 40 years. He was semi-retired now, a man who looked like a grumpy tortoise in a three-piece suit. He operated out of a small, wood-paneled office in San Francisco that smelled of old paper and justice. Getting to him was a logistical nightmare. I wasn't allowed to leave the estate without permission. My car, a beat-up 2010 sedan, was technically owned by the company, and my father tracked the mileage. So, I faked a toothache. I need a root canal, I told my mother one Tuesday morning, clutching my jaw. It's infected. Ugh, fine, Cordelia sighed, not looking up from her iPad. Go. But don't put it on the company card. Use your, whatever allowance you have. I didn't have an allowance, which she knew. I had $40 in cash I had made selling vintage wine bottles I dug out of the trash to collectors on eBay. I drove to San Francisco, my heart hammering against my ribs the entire way. If my father checked the GPS tracker on the car, I was dead. I parked 3 blocks away from Holloway's office and ran the rest of the way. Mr. Holloway's secretary tried to stop me. Miss, do you have an appointment? Tell him it's about Josephine's bird, I said, breathless. 2 minutes later, I was sitting in his office. Holloway looked at me over his spectacles. He looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. Valerie Hawthorne, he said. You look tired. I am tired, I said. I'm working 80-hour weeks for free. I heard, he grunted. Your father has a reputation. He calls it character building. I call it violation of labor laws. But without proof. I reached into my bag and pulled out a flash drive. I placed it on his desk. What's this? Clause 4, Section B, I said. Holloway froze. He looked at me, then at the drive. He plugged it into his computer. I watched his face as he scrolled. He opened the folder labeled timesheets. He saw the scans. He saw the signatures. He opened the folder labeled audio. He clicked on a random file, my father's voice filling the room, berating me for a spreadsheet error. Holloway sat back in his chair. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. He signed them? Holloway asked, his voice quiet. Preston actually signed the timesheets? Every Friday, I said. For 3 years. I have 2 more years to go before I hit the 5-year mark to trigger the hostile takeover clause. Sweat equity, Holloway whispered. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood in the water. Josephine was a genius. She told me she set a trap, but I never thought Preston would be arrogant enough to walk right into it. Can we do it? I asked. Can we take the estate? With this? Holloway tapped the screen. Valerie, we can't just take the estate. We can bury him. This is clear-cut contractual obligation. He has certified, in writing, that you have contributed millions of dollars in unpaid capital. He leaned forward. But you have to be careful. If he finds out, he will fire you before the timeline is up. He will ban you from the property. You have to endure 2 more years. Can you do that? I thought about the way my mother looked through me. I thought about Bianca's laughter. I thought about the mud and the cold and the exhaustion. I can do it, I said. Good, Holloway said. I'll start preparing the filings. We keep this offline. No digital paper trail that his lawyers can find. When the day comes, call me. Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Don't thank me yet, he said, opening a drawer and pulling out a burner phone. Take this. Direct line to me. Encrypted. And Valerie? Yes? Your grandmother would be proud. You're not a bird anymore. You're a hawk. The paranoia was the hardest part. Living a double life in the same house wears you down. And 6 months ago, I almost lost everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My parents were supposed to be at a charity gala in Los Angeles. Bianca was at Coachella. The house was empty. I was in the main office, using the high-speed scanner to digitize the latest batch of financial records. I needed to prove not just my hours, but the value of my work. I was scanning the profit and loss statements that showed a 20% revenue increase since I took over the logistics. The scanner was rhythmic. Work-click. Work-click. I was complacent. I had my headphones in, listening to a podcast about corporate law. I didn't hear the car pull up. The door to the office slammed open. I jumped, knocking a stack of papers onto the floor. Preston stood in the doorway. He wasn't in LA. He was here, and he was furious. His face was red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Where is it? He roared. I scrambled to minimize the window on the computer screen. My heart was beating so fast I thought I might pass out. If he saw the folder named Hostile Takeover Prep, it was game over. Where is what, Dad? I stammered, standing up to block the screen. The case of 82 Cabernet, he shouted, storming into the room. The reserve vintage. I promised Senator Miller a bottle and it's not in the cellar. He was drunk. That was the only reason he hadn't noticed my panic yet. It's in the climate-controlled archive, I lied. I moved it because the cellar humidity was fluctuating. Preston stopped. He narrowed his eyes at me. He looked at the scanner. He looked at the papers on the floor, invoices, tax returns, his own bank statements. What are you doing? He asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low pitch. Why are you going through my financial records? Time stopped. My mind raced. Think. I was looking for the shipping insurance receipt, I said, my voice trembling just the right amount. For the 82 Cabernet. Since I moved it, I wanted to make sure the valuation was updated in the inventory log. He stared at me. His eyes were glassy, scanning my face for deception. He took a step closer. I could smell the scotch on his breath. You're obsessed with paperwork, he sneered. Just like a little secretary. You have no vision, Valerie. Just lists and receipts. He looked at the computer screen. The minimized window was still there in the taskbar. He reached for the mouse. Dad, I said, stepping aside. If you want the wine, I can get it right now. But if you touch the computer, you might mess up the inventory sync. It's very complicated. He paused. His hand hovered over the mouse. Then he snorted. Complicated. Right. Because you're the genius of complexity. He pulled his hand back. Get the wine, he ordered. Bring it to the car. And then clean this mess up. You look pathetic, scrambling around on the floor. Yes, Dad. He turned and walked out. I collapsed into the chair. My legs were jelly. I looked at the computer screen. 1 click. He was 1 click away from seeing the file structure that mapped out the destruction of his life. I realized then that I couldn't just be careful. I had to be invisible. I deleted the local files immediately, scrubbing the hard drive, leaving only the cloud backups. That night, I threw up in the bathroom sink. But the next morning, I was back in the vineyard at 5 a.m. Fear is a powerful motivator, but hatred? Hatred is a renewable energy source. 2 days before the party. The tension in the house was physical, like static electricity before a storm. Bianca was in CEO mode, which meant she was walking around with a clipboard she didn't know how to use, barking orders at staff she didn't know the names of. "We need more white roses," she screamed at the florist. I said eggshell white, not cream. God, is everyone incompetent? I was in the pantry, organizing the wine selection for the VIP dinner that night. This was a crucial dinner. The top 10 investors were coming to preview the new leadership. Bianca stormed in. "Valerie! What are you doing with those bottles?" "I'm pulling the 2015 Merlot for the steak course," I said. "Ugh, no," Bianca snatched the bottle from my hand. "Merlot is so peasant. We're serving the 2021 Sauvignon Blanc. It's lighter. It's fresher. It matches my dress." I stared at her. "Bianca, you can't serve a young, acidic white wine with dry-aged ribeye. It will taste like battery acid. The tannins in the steak need a heavy red." "Excuse me," she laughed, a high, incredulous sound. "Since when are you a sommelier?" "You just grow the grapes, Val. I curate the experience. Dad said I'm the visionary. Put the Merlot back. We're doing the Blanc." She marched out. I stood there holding the Merlot. I could have fought her. I could have gone to Dad. But then I thought, no. Let them see. I put the Merlot back. I pulled the crates of Sauvignon Blanc. That night, I served the dinner. I wore my black uniform, blending into the wallpaper. I poured the white wine as the steaks were served. I watched the investors, men and women who had been drinking fine wine since before Bianca was born. Mr. Thorne, the biggest investor, and my father's fiercest rival, took a bite of steak, then a sip of wine. His face contorted. It was subtle, a slight pucker of the lips, a flinch of the eyebrow, but to me, it was loud as a scream. He set the glass down and didn't touch it again. "Interesting pairing, Preston," Thorne said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Very avant-garde. Bianca chose it." Preston beamed, oblivious. "She has an instinct for disrupting the norm." "She certainly disrupted my palate," Thorne muttered to his wife. I caught Thorne's eye as I cleared the plates. He looked at the untouched wine, then at me. I kept my face blank, but I gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. He paused. He looked at Bianca, who was taking a selfie with her steak. Then he looked back at me. He saw the competence in how I moved, the embarrassment in my eyes for the wine choice. He knew. In that moment, I realized I might have an ally in the room when the bomb went off. Later, in the kitchen, Bianca was gloating. "Did you see how much they loved it?" Thorne said it was avant-garde. "That means genius, Valerie. Look it up." "I know what it means, Bianca," I said, scraping the wasted expensive steaks into the bin. "Good. Now scrub these pots. I want my hands to look perfect for the press photos tomorrow." I scrubbed the pots. I scrubbed until my hands were raw. Let her have the credit, I told myself. She's just polishing the brass on the Titanic. The night before the party. The calm before the execution. It was 11 p.m. The house was finally quiet. The event planners had left. The security team I had secretly coordinated with Marcus was in position at the perimeter, disguised as parking attendants. I found my mother in the sunroom. She was drinking a glass of wine, looking out at the moonlit vineyard. For a moment, she looked human. Soft, almost. I walked in. "Mom?" She didn't turn. The florists left a mess on the patio. Clean it up before you sleep. I will, I said. I stepped closer. This was it. The last chance for redemption. The last chance for me to stop the freight train that was about to hit them. Mom, do you think I've worked hard? I asked. My voice was small, like the child I used to be. Cordelia sighed, a long, weary sound. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were beautiful and empty. Valerie, she said. We've given you a home. We've given you structure. Most families would have institutionalized someone with your limitations. Limitations? I asked. I run the books. I manage the harvest. I designed the new building. You follow instructions, she corrected me coldly. You are a worker bee, darling. And that's fine. The world needs worker bees. But don't confuse effort with importance. She took a sip of wine. Your father and I have discussed your future, she continued. After Bianca takes over tomorrow, we think it's best if you move into the caretaker's shed by the north gate. Bianca wants to turn the servants' quarters into a yoga studio. And frankly, having you in the main house, it sends the wrong message. My heart stopped. The caretaker's shed. It was a glorified shack. No heating. No insulation. They were kicking me out of the servants' quarters to make room for yoga. You're evicting me? I asked. We're transitioning you, she smiled. A cruel, thin smile. It's time you learned some independence. Of course, you'll still work your shifts. Rent isn't free, you know. I looked at her. Really looked at her. I looked for love. I looked for pity. I looked for a shred of maternal instinct. I found nothing. Just a mirror reflecting her own vanity. The last thread of guilt I had about destroying them snapped. It made a sound in my head like a gunshot. Okay, Mom, I said. I understand. I'll move. Good girl, she patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. Now go clean the patio. I want it spotless for Bianca's big day. Don't worry, I said, stepping back into the shadows. Tomorrow is going to be spotless. I walked out to the patio. I didn't clean it. Instead, I sat on the stone wall and texted Mr. Holloway. Message, they're moving me to the shed. No mercy. Reply, Holloway, the paperwork is filed. The trap is set. Happy birthday, Valerie. I looked at the time. Midnight. It was officially my birthday. And it was officially the day I became the owner of the Hawthorne estate. The morning of the party broke with a deceptive calm. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, the kind of chamber of commerce weather that my father believed he was personally responsible for. By 8 a.m., the estate was swarming. Caterers, florists, musicians, and valet drivers were running around like ants in a disturbed hill. I slipped out the back service entrance. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus, package arrived at the north gate. I walked briskly to the delivery entrance. A black unmarked van was idling there. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a generic security uniform that looked almost identical to the ones our usual elderly gate guards wore, but the fit was different. It was tailored. And the way he stood, hands loose but ready, screamed military experience. Miss Hawthorne? He asked. His voice was low. Valerie, I corrected. Are your men ready? 5 on the inside, 3 on the perimeter, he said. Mr. Holloway briefed us. We answer only to you. Good, I handed him a folded piece of paper. Here are the blind spots for the current CCTV system. I disabled the cameras in the main hall for routine maintenance 10 minutes ago. They won't come back on until I reboot the server. That gives you 20 minutes to position your team without being recorded. He nodded, impressed. And the local police? My father will call them, I said. He always does when he feels threatened. But Mr. Holloway is handling the sheriff. Understood. We'll be invisible until you give the signal. I watched them infiltrate the grounds. They moved like smoke. Within minutes, they had replaced the regular parking attendants, who were all too happy to take $100 bill from Marcus to go take a nap in the break room. I walked back to the house. I went to the laundry room and put on my uniform. Black trousers, white button-down shirt, black vest. The uniform of the invisible class. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like a CEO. I didn't look like an heiress. I looked like help. Perfect, I whispered. I walked into the main ballroom. The stage was set. A massive screen was erected behind the podium to display a slideshow of Bianca's achievements, mostly photos of her on vacation. The microphone stand was wrapped in white roses. I walked over to the audio mixing board in the corner. The sound technician was a freelance guy named Steve, who I had hired 3 years ago. "Hey Steve," I said, sliding a bottle of water onto his console. "Hey Val," he grinned. "Big day for the sister, huh?" "Huge," I said. "Hey, can I check the backup mic? Just in case the main one fails? You know how Dad gets if there's a glitch." "Sure thing," he pointed to a wireless mic sitting on the table. "Channel 4. It's live." I picked up the mic. I checked the frequency. Then, while Steve turned to check his levels, I quickly plugged a small USB drive into the console's main input port. "Thanks, Steve," I said, putting the mic in my back pocket, hidden under my vest. "I'll keep this on me, just in case." "You're a lifesaver, Val." I walked away. The trap was primed. The gunpowder was laid. Now, all I needed was for Preston to light the match. 7 p.m. The sun dipped below the vineyards, bathing the estate in a golden magic hour of light. 200 guests had arrived. It was a sea of tailored suits, silk dresses, and fake smiles. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. I was one of them. I weaved through the guests, offering drinks, taking empty glasses. I was invisible. I stood right next to people I had known my whole life, neighbors, business partners, and they looked right through me. "Preston has really outdone himself," I heard Mrs. Gable say. "Although, giving the company to Bianca? Is she ready?" "Does it matter?" her husband laughed. "The brand sells itself. Besides, Preston will still be pulling the strings. Bianca is just the hood ornament." I moved on. At 7:30, the music faded. A spotlight hit the stage. Preston walked out. He looked every inch the patriarch. Tan, silver-haired, exuding power. The crowd applauded politely. "Thank you. Thank you all for coming," Preston boomed. His voice was rich and confident. "Tonight isn't just a party. It's a legacy. For 30 years, I have built Hawthorne Vineyards into a global symbol of excellence." He paused for effect. "But a legacy must evolve. It must have youth. Vitality. Vision." He gestured to the side of the stage. Bianca walked out. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered like liquid mercury. She waved like she was accepting an Oscar. "My daughter, Bianca," Preston said, putting an arm around her. "My heir. The new CEO of Hawthorne Vineyards." The applause was louder this time, though I saw Elias Thorne in the front row checking his watch. "Bianca has the spark," Preston continued. "The DNA of a leader. Unlike." He chuckled, a sound that made my stomach turn. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on me. I was standing near the back, holding a tray of dirty glasses. "Unlike some of us," he smirked. The spotlight swung around and hit me. I blinked in the harsh glare. "Valerie, give a wave." "There she is. My other daughter. Hard at work." A ripple of awkward laughter went through the crowd. "We love Valerie," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. "She proves that God loves balance. For every genius, there must be a worker. She keeps the floors clean so Bianca can reach the stars. The laughter grew. It was cruel. It was public. It was the ultimate humiliation. Bianca leaned into the mic. Thanks for the clean floors, Val. Don't drop those glasses. My mother, standing in the front row, clapped delicately. I didn't move. I didn't drop the glasses. I looked at my father. I looked at the man who had stolen 5 years of my life. That's it, I thought. That was the match. I set the tray down on a nearby table. I didn't rush. I walked calmly toward the audio booth. Preston was raising his glass. To Bianca. To the future. To the future, the crowd echoed. I reached the booth. Steve, the sound tech, looked at me. Val? What do you need? I need you to take a break, Steve, I said. Before he could answer, I reached past him and yanked the master XLR cable out of the main board. The sound of silence is violent. 1 second, the room was filled with jazz and amplified voices. The next, pop, and then dead air. The microphone in Preston's hand went dead. The ambient music cut out. The sudden lack of noise was so jarring that 200 people simultaneously gasped. What the hell? Preston tapped the mic. Thump. Thump. Nothing. He looked toward the sound booth, his face twisting from charm into rage. Steve. Fix it. We're losing the vibe. Steve was backing away, confused, looking at me. I stepped up to the console. I put on the headset. I flipped the switch for channel 4, the backup wireless mic I had stashed in my pocket. Then, I hit the button for the override lighting preset I had programmed 3 months ago. The warm, golden chandeliers in the ballroom went black. Screams. Genuine panic this time. The room was plunged into darkness. Then, a single, harsh white spotlight beam cut through the dark. But it didn't land on Preston. And it didn't land on Bianca. It landed on me. I stood at the back of the room, near the tech booth, illuminated in a pool of white light. I held the wireless microphone to my lips. The vibe is fine, Father, I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, clearer and louder than his had ever been. We're just changing the playlist. Preston squinted into the light, shielding his eyes. Valerie? What are you doing? Turn the lights back on. You're ruining your sister's night. It's not her night, I said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. The spotlight tracked me. The guests parted like the Red Sea, backing away from the crazy girl in the server uniform. And it's not your house. Security. Preston roared. Get her. She's having an episode. Bianca was shrieking. Oh my God, she's psychotic. Mom, do something. 2 security guards stepped out from the shadows near the stage. Preston pointed at me. Grab her. Drag her out. The guards looked at Preston. Then they looked at me. They didn't move. I said grab her. Preston screamed, his voice cracking without the microphone. They don't work for you, Preston, I said calmly, stopping 10 feet from the stage. They work for the owner of this property. I am the owner, he yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. No, I said. You're just the tenant who hasn't paid his rent. I pulled the USB remote from my pocket and pointed it at the giant screen behind Bianca. Let's look at the receipts. I clicked the remote. The screen behind Bianca, which was displaying a photo of her drinking champagne in Bali, flickered. Then it changed. A massive, high-resolution scan of a document appeared. It was 50 feet wide. You could see the grain of the paper. Weekly timesheet week 1 signed, Preston Hawthorne. I clicked again. Weekly timesheet week 52 signed, Preston Hawthorne. I clicked again. The images started cycling faster. Week 100. Week 150. Week 200. It was a strobe light of bureaucracy. Hundreds of signatures. Thousands of hours. What is this? Bianca asked, looking at the screen, confused. Why are there so many papers? That, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, is the bill. I turned to the crowd. I saw the investors. I saw Elias Thorne. He was leaning forward, his eyes narrowed, reading the text on the screen. For 5 years, I said, addressing the room, my father told you I was finding myself. He told you I was slow. He told you I was a burden. I clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a spreadsheet. It showed the math. Total unpaid hours, 21,400. Valuation of labor, $3,200,000. Sweat equity conversion, x $39,600,000. I wasn't finding myself, I continued. I was finding his profit margins. I was running his logistics. I was balancing his books. And every Friday, he made me sign a document confirming that I was working full-time for $0. I turned to Preston. He was frozen. He was staring at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He recognized the documents. He recognized his own signature. You stole those, he stammered. I didn't steal them, I said. You gave them to me. You made me sign them to humiliate me. You thought you were documenting my worthlessness. But you were actually documenting your debt. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen displayed Clause 4, Section B of the operating agreement. The text was highlighted in red. Automatic conversion to majority ownership. According to the bylaws of this company, I said, which my grandmother wrote and you signed, unpaid labor converts to stock. As of midnight last night, my equity stake crossed the 51% threshold. I looked straight at Elias Thorne in the front row. Mr. Thorne, I said. You know corporate law. What happens when a majority shareholder votes to remove the current CEO for incompetence? Thorne stood up slowly. A hush fell over the room. He looked at Preston, then at me. Then a slow, wide grin spread across his face. The motion carries immediately, Thorne announced. The CEO is terminated. The room erupted in whispers. Preston looked like he had been punched in the gut. He looked around at his friends, his investors. They were all looking at the screen. They were doing the math. This is insane. Preston screamed. It's a trick. She's a liar. She hacked the computer. He lunged off the stage, coming toward me. His hands were curled into claws. He looked ready to kill. You ungrateful little witch, he roared. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Because I knew what was coming next. Preston didn't reach me. Before he could take 3 steps, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. Blue and red lights flashed from the driveway, cutting through the windows. The sound of sirens wailed, drowning out the murmurs of the crowd. Police, a voice shouted. Everybody stay where you are. 4 uniformed officers marched into the room. Their hands were on their holsters. They looked serious. They looked ready for a riot. Preston stopped. A look of triumph washed over his face. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with malice. You think you're smart? He hissed at me. I knew you were up to something. I called them 20 minutes ago. He turned to the officers, putting on his best, concerned citizen face. Officers? Over here. Preston shouted. Thank God you're here. That woman, he pointed a shaking finger at me, she's armed. She's mentally unstable. She's holding us hostage. The lead officer, a thick-necked man named Sergeant Miller, spotted me. I was the only one standing in the spotlight. I was the obvious threat. Ma'am. Miller shouted, drawing his taser. Step away from the guests. Put your hands on your head. Do it now. The crowd screamed and scrambled back. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the gamble. If Holloway hadn't done his job, if he was late, I was going to jail. And once I was in the system, Preston would bury the evidence before I made bail. I am unarmed, I shouted back, dropping the microphone. I raised my hands slowly. I am the owner of this property. Get on the ground, Miller yelled, advancing on me. I won't ask twice. Arrest her. Bianca screamed from the stage, filming it all on her phone. She threatened to burn the house down. I heard her. Miller was 5 feet away. I could see the prongs of the taser. Wait. The voice came from the side entrance. It wasn't loud, but it was authoritative. It cracked like a whip. Mr. Holloway stepped into the light. He was walking with a cane, but he moved with purpose. He held a thick stack of legal documents in his hand like a weapon. Sergeant Miller, Holloway said. If you deploy that weapon, you will be facing a lawsuit that will bankrupt this county for the next 3 generations. Miller hesitated. He glanced at Holloway. Who are you? I am the attorney for the Hawthorne estate, Holloway said, stopping between me and the police. He thrust the papers at Miller. And this is a court order, signed by Judge Reynolds 20 minutes ago, recognizing Valerie Hawthorne as the sole executor and majority shareholder of this corporation. Preston laughed. It was a manic, desperate sound. Judge Reynolds? He's my golf partner. He would never sign that. He did, Holloway said, turning to look at Preston with pure disdain. Once I showed him the forensic accounting of how you'd been embezzling funds from the investors to pay for your gambling debts in Vegas. He was remarkably eager to distance himself from you. The room went dead silent. Embezzling? Elias Thorne's voice cut through the air. It's a lie. Preston shrieked. It's all lies. Officer, Holloway continued, ignoring Preston. You were called here on a false report of an armed intruder. The only intruder here is the man standing on that stage. He has been terminated from his position and is currently trespassing on private property. Holloway turned to me. He nodded. Miss Hawthorne, Holloway said. What are your instructions regarding the trespassers? I lowered my hands. I looked at Miller. He holstered his taser. He looked at the court order, then at Preston. The power dynamic in the room shifted so fast the air pressure seemed to drop. I looked at Preston. He was shrinking. The bluster was gone. He looked small. Old. I looked at Bianca. She had stopped recording. Her mouth was hanging open. I looked at my mother. She was clutching her pearls, her face pale as a sheet. I picked up the microphone from the floor. Officers, I said. I'd like these people removed from my home. Immediately. The silence in the room was heavier than the darkness had been. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on the stage, watching the disintegration of a dynasty. Sergeant Miller looked at the paperwork Holloway had handed him. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed. He was a small-town cop used to breaking up bar fights, not adjudicating corporate hostile takeovers. But a judge's signature was a language everyone understood. This looks valid, Miller said, looking up at Preston. Mr. Hawthorne, according to this, you are no longer the authorized agent for this address. It's a forgery. Preston spat, his face slick with sweat. He pointed at Holloway. This man is a senile old hack. He was my mother's charity case. I was your mother's trusted advisor, Holloway corrected him, his voice icy. And I am the man who just handed the district attorney the file on the Cayman Island accounts you've been using to siphon operating capital. That's why Judge Reynolds signed the order, Preston. He didn't want to be indicted as an accessory. A gasp went through the room. I saw the investors in the front row, the people whose money Preston had been stealing, stand up. Elias Thorne walked toward the stage. He didn't look at Preston. He looked at me. Valerie, Thorne said. Is this true? Can you verify the missing capital? I can, I said. I have the wire transfer logs. $3 million over the last 4 years. Disguised as consulting fees to a shell company in Nevada. A company registered too. I paused, looking at my sister. Bianca Hawthorne. All eyes turned to Bianca. What? Bianca shrieked. I don't own a company. I don't even know where Nevada is. You signed the incorporation papers, sweetheart, Preston hissed at her, throwing her under the bus without a second thought. I told you it was for tax purposes. You told me it was for a modeling contract. Bianca screamed back. Enough. Sergeant Miller shouted. He stepped between them. Mr. Hawthorne, Miss Hawthorne, this is a civil matter regarding the property, but the fraud allegations? That's criminal. You're going to need to come with us. You can't arrest me. Preston roared. I am Preston Hawthorne. I built this valley. Technically, I said into the microphone, Grandpa built it. You just leveraged it. I turned to the team of private security guards I had hired, the men in black who had been waiting in the shadows. Gentlemen, I said. Please assist the sheriff. Escort the former management off the premises. They have. I checked my watch. 9 minutes to collect their personal effects. Anything left behind becomes property of the estate. You can't do this, Valerie. Cordelia cried out. She pushed past the police, running toward me. Her eyes were wild. We're your family. I'm your mother. You can't kick your mother out on the street. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Valerie, listen to me, she pleaded, her voice dropping to that manipulative whisper she used whenever she wanted something. We can fix this. We can be partners. You've proved your point. You're smart. We see that now. We'll give you a raise. We'll give you a title. Just, stop this. I looked at her hand on my arm. I remembered all the times she had slapped that same arm when I dropped a dish. I remembered her laughing when I fell in the mud. I remembered her telling me I was a genetic disappointment. I pulled my arm away. I don't need a raise, Mother, I said. I set my own salary now. The next 10 minutes were a blur of chaotic justice. The private security team moved with military precision. They flanked Preston and Bianca, guiding them firmly toward the exit. Preston was still shouting threats, promising lawsuits, promising ruin. But without his checkbook, his threats were just noise. My car. Bianca yelled as they reached the door. I need my Range Rover. My purse is in there. The Range Rover is leased by the company, I said, my voice amplified by the speakers. Leave the keys. You B-word, she screamed, lunging at me. A security guard caught her easily, holding her back by her arm. I hate you. I always hated you. You're just a jealous, ugly little troll. And you, I said calmly, are unemployed. Goodbye, Bianca. They were shoved out the double doors. The room was silent. The guests were frozen, unsure of what to do. They had come for a party, and they had witnessed an execution. I stood alone on the floor. I felt lightheaded. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Then, slow clapping started. It was Elias Thorne. He was standing by his table, clapping his hands. Well played, he said loud enough for the room to hear. I haven't seen a hostile takeover that clean since the 80s. He raised his glass of wine, the Sauvignon Blanc I had tried to warn them about. Though, he grimaced, looking at the glass, the wine is terrible. You were right about the pairing. I know, I said. I'll open the 82 Cabernet. It's in the back. Thorne smiled. Now that is a CEO decision I can support. He turned to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I'm staying. It seems management has finally improved. The tension broke. People started talking. Nervous laughter turned into genuine chatter. The waiters, my friends, the people I had worked with for years, looked at me with wide eyes. Marcus, the Vineyard manager, walked out from the kitchen. He was holding a bottle of the 82 Reserve. He walked straight to me. "Boss," he said, handing me the bottle and a corkscrew. "You want to do the honors?" I took the bottle. It was heavy. It felt like a scepter. "No, Marcus," I said. "You open it. Pour a glass for Mr. Thorne. And pour one for yourself." "And for you?" he asked. "I have some cleaning to do," I said, looking at the mess on the stage. "But tomorrow we work." I didn't stay for the party. I left the entertaining to the new board of directors, which was basically Elias Thorne and Mr. Holloway holding court with the investors. I walked out to the front balcony. From here, I could see the long, winding driveway that led to the main gate. It was a mile long, lined with ancient oak trees. Down below, 3 figures were walking. They looked small from here. Just shadows in the moonlight. Preston was in the lead, walking with a stiff, angry gait. He was probably already on the phone with his lawyers, not realizing that his retainer checks were about to bounce. Bianca was trailing behind, struggling to walk in her 6-inch heels on the gravel. I could hear her faint shrieks even from here. She had refused to take the gift bag shoes, cheap flip-flops, that the security guards offered. And Cordelia. She was walking in the middle. She stopped once, turning back to look at the house. The house she had ruled like a queen for 30 years. I wondered what she was thinking. Was she regretting how she treated me? Was she wondering where she went wrong? Or was she just calculating how to spin this to her friends at the country club? Probably the latter. I watched them until they reached the iron gates. The security team was waiting there. They opened the gates, ushered them out, and then, with a finality that echoed across the valley, slammed them shut. The heavy clang of metal on metal was the best sound I had ever heard. Better than any applause. Better than any music. It was the sound of a cage closing. But this time I wasn't inside. They were outside. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of jasmine and night-blooming primrose. For the first time in my life, the air didn't smell like fear. It smelled like ownership. My phone buzzed. A text from Mr. Holloway. Message: the police report is filed. The locks are being changed tomorrow. Go to sleep, Valerie. You earned it. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to walk my fields. The transition wasn't easy. Empires don't just change hands, they have to be rebuilt. The first month was chaos. Preston had hidden debt everywhere. There were liens on the tractors, unpaid invoices for the glass, and a lawsuit pending from a distributor he had insulted. But I knew where the bodies were buried. I knew every number. I fired the expensive consultants my father kept on payroll. I promoted Marcus to director of operations. I hired Steve, the sound guy, to handle our IT permanently. We rebranded. Hawthorne Vineyards became the V&J Estate, Valerie and Josephine. The market responded. Our first vintage under the new label, a robust, honest Cabernet, won gold at the state fair. We sold out in 3 weeks. As for my family? Preston spent the first 3 months suing me. He burned through his remaining cash on lawyers who promised him they could overturn the sweat equity clause. They couldn't. The documentation was too perfect. The judge threw the case out with prejudice and ordered Preston to pay my legal fees. He declared bankruptcy 2 weeks later. Last I heard, he was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Arizona, working as a car salesman. Apparently, he tells customers he used to be a tycoon until his mentally ill daughter stole his company. Nobody believes him. Bianca didn't fare much better. Without the unlimited credit card and the influencer lifestyle funded by Daddy, her friends evaporated. She tried to get a job in fashion, but it turns out attending parties isn't a transferable skill. I heard from a friend that she's working as a hostess at a chain restaurant in Los Angeles. She has to wear a uniform. She has to smile at customers who don't know who she is. I hope she appreciates the irony. And Cordelia? She sends me emails. Long, rambling emails about forgiveness and family bonds. She asks for money. She says the apartment in Arizona has cockroaches. She says Preston drinks too much. I replied once. I set up a direct deposit for them. It's a monthly stipend. The amount is calculated exactly based on the federal minimum wage for a part-time intern. $7.25 an hour. 20 hours a month. $145. I sent it with a pay stub attached. The memo line always reads, performance-based compensation. They cash the checks every month. They hate me, but they need the money. And every time they sign the back of that check, they are working for me. I am sitting in my father's old office as I write this. Well, it's my office now. I burned the mahogany desk. It smelled too much like scotch and arrogance. I replaced it with a simple oak table, big enough for blueprints and soil samples. On the wall, where Preston used to hang his vanity awards, I have framed one thing. It's the timesheet from the week of my 25th birthday. Hours worked, 92. Signature, Preston Hawthorne. It reminds me that power isn't given. It's not inherited. It's not about who your parents are or what school you went to. Power is simply the ability to outlast your oppressor. It's the patience to document the abuse until the weight of the evidence crushes them. Sometimes, I miss having a family. I see people with their parents, laughing at lunch, and I feel a pang of jealousy. But then I remember the cold. I remember the mud. I remember the way they looked at me like I was a mistake. I wasn't a mistake. I was a reckoning. Grandma Josephine was right. The bird didn't just fly the coop. She bought the farm. So, here is my question to you. My mother emailed me yesterday saying that the $145 isn't enough to cover their air conditioning bill. She said I am being cruel beyond measure for sitting on millions while they suffer. I deleted the email. But I want to know. Am I the monster here? Should I have forgiven them after I took the company? Or do people who treat their children like slaves deserve to live like servants? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed watching a genetic failure take down a narcissist empire, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories where this came from, and trust me, the tea is just as good as the wine. Thanks for watching.